So, for my money, Wilfred Owen is the greatest of the World War I poets. He was a soldier who served on the front lines, the Western Front, from 1915 until his death in 1918, a week before the war ended. And he captured the violence, the brutality, the darkness, the pain, the disillusionment, the hatred, the fear of that World War I experience, to me, better than anyone else. He had a fantastic command of imagery and language, using techniques like alliteration, repetition, and then para-rhyme, which is a form he pioneers, which is rhymes that are not quite rhymes, and basically the idea of para-rhyme is that it creates this sort of sense of unfulfilled expectation, or this sense of failure, failed connection, failed whatever it is. So I asked you guys to read two of Owen's poems for this week. Anthem for Doomed Youth on 2034 and 2035, and then Dulce Et Decorum Est on 2037. So let's take a poem. Let's take Anthem for Doomed Youth first. This is a critique of the religious rhetoric that went into recruiting for World War I. And we can see the same kind of rhetoric, and we see this critique also in Dulce Et Decorum Est. But, I mean, this was a sort of universal recruiting technique, was appealing to Christian duty. And if you read, say, a German text like All Quiet on the Western Front, you get this same kinds of rhetoric being used to recruit for the German army that you have for the British army. But recruiters were appealing to Christian duty, to nationalism, to honor, to manliness, all of these things, protecting the women of England or the women of Germany or whatever it was. And so in Anthem for Doomed Youth, Owen is directly taking issue with this religious rhetoric, because what he's saying is that in this horrible environment, this horrible place of the trenches, the only religion is death. The only religion is violence and battle. So this first section here: what passing bells for those who die as cattle, only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling them from sad shires. So we've got here this space Owen is evoking where people die as cattle. So they are reduced from humanity to this sort of bestial form. And in this place, the only funerary laments, the only rituals, the only prayers are the sounds of gunfire, the sounds of artillery, destruction and death. The only things that we get here. Only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. The rifle becomes the prayer. And this is actually, we get here in this, in lines 2 and 4, an example of that para-rhyme I was just telling you about. Guns and orisons. It's close to a rhyme, but it's not exactly a rhyme. And so, again, we have this sort of sense of not quite closing. The line doesn't quite link up, which is thematically what Owen is going for here. But we've got, again, this sort of sense that religion is out of place, and that the religious leaders who use their influence to send young men to this brutal battleground have betrayed those young men to a religion of death. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells. This is line 5. We've got, again, this sort of sense that religion is totally out of place here, and it needs to be... It's a loss. There's the loss of religion, there's a loss of faith, loss of purposefulness that gets tied to all of these things. And we get this as well in Dulce Et Decorum Est. So again, this is page 2037. And this comes, we get the full phrase here at the end, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which is from Horace, which means it is sweet and meet to die for one's country. And you can see this in the footnote here as well. And this is the ironic jumping off point for Owen's poem, because his entire point here is that it's horrific to die for one's country. It's horrific to be in World War I. So we get in this opening paragraph, or this opening stanza, these negative images. So we get something far removed from the sort of positive, honorable, chivalrous, romanticized image of the soldier. Lines 1 and 2, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. And then lines 6 and 7, all went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. So we've got these sort of negative images. These are people who've been broken down, who are physically deformed or physically sort of crippled by this experience. And then in the second stanza we get some of the most brutal, morbid imagery of any poetry. This depiction of a young man dying in a gas attack, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. So we've got, in this second stanza, this actual depiction of this young man's death in a gas attack. And as I talked about in the overview video for the World War I reading list, poison gas, which was often chlorine gas, was an incredibly painful way to die, and it made it incredibly painful to live if you survived it, because basically it would burn out the insides of your throat, it would char your lungs, burn the inside of your nose, it would burn your eyes. So basically this was a really terrible way to get. This was, poison gas, chlorine gas is not a way that you want to die. But then this third stanza, this very short 2-section stanza of 15 to 16, in all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. This is shell shock. What we would now call PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And Owen was hospitalized with shell shock. Like he was actually sent to a hospital where he met Siegfried Sassoon. But this is part of the terrible experience of World War I, is nightmares, and the way in which the brutality, the inhumanity, and the sort of morbid experience of the war would implant itself in the soldier's unconscious mind. And then of course the ironic ending of this poem is the direct address to the reader, or as the footnote says, the direct address to Jesse Pope, to whom the poem was originally to have been dedicated. But we can also read this as the direct address to any reader, and especially the readers on the home front, who, to a certain extent, didn't understand how brutal and terrible the conditions of World War I were. So the end here, the last 4 lines from 25 through the end. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et Decorum Est pro patria mori. So, this is about the poet saying to the people who sent them to war, if you knew what it was like, if you knew how horrible this experience is, you would not encourage people to go. You would not romanticize war, and you would find a way to make peace.